Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have our DraftKings breakdown of the NFL main slate for Week 5. We have some pretty good options here. It's not my favorite slate of the season, but it's still a pretty solid slate. Before I get started, if you can please smash that like button and that subscribe button, that really would help. I really do appreciate it. But let's get into these players. So at quarterback, we have four good options here. The first guy is Josh Allen against Buffalo. Now, the real risk with him is if this game gets out of hand, it could potentially do that, and that could cap him a little bit. But even against Tennessee in Week 2, it got out of hand. He still scored 32 fantasy points, so I still think he's a great option in this particular slate. Jalen Hurts is my second guy here. He has a little bit less upside, but he's been pretty solid this season. I've actually used him every week, and I haven't been disappointed by his production. His price has come up some, though, so that is a little bit of risk, and his last game was not quite as good as we'd like. But overall, he still has plus upside in this great matchup against Arizona. Kyler Murray for Arizona against Philly. This is a little bit of a riskier option. Kyler Murray has been really good and consistent so far this season, but I will say that Philadelphia is a pretty good team, and they do tend to be pretty difficult to play against. But overall, I think he's in a great spot here, or in a good spot, rather. Not a great spot, but a good spot. Then the final guy at quarterback, he's kind of a safe option to, save money on if you're desperate, is going to be Teddy Bridgewater. Now that he's going to get a full game, he really does have potential to get 250 plus yards and a couple touchdowns in this matchup. Plus, he's got a pretty good situation with Tyreek Hill, so I do like him in this particular matchup, and I really like the potential outcome in this game for him. And his price is so cheap that he's hard to not really think a lot about. I'm actually going to look at wide receivers next because I do want to talk about Tyreek Hill with Teddy Bridgewater. You do want to make sure that Tyreek Hill is playing. He is questionable, and so you do. But if he does play, he has real potential. That big game here. Teddy Bridgewater will look for him early and often, and Bridgewater has the arm to get him the ball where he wants. Like I said, make sure that Tyreek Hill is playing before you load up on Teddy Bridgewater, but just keep that in mind. Let's go ahead and get at the running backs, though. So we got Derrick Henry here first for Tennessee against Washington. He's been pretty consistent the last 2 weeks, even though he started the season kind of rough. But we kind of see this from a lot of players. Like the first couple weeks, they kind of didn't do very well, and then they got going in the last couple weeks. So I think he's in a great spot here against Washington. Then we have Leonard Fournette, who he just hasn't been able to get going, though his scoring has been pretty decent on on DraftKings. He's definitely not very useful on FanDuel, but his price is a lot nice and cheap over here on DraftKings, so I do like him as a potential option, especially with his price staying pretty less expensive than some of the more high-end guys. Dalvin Cook's in a great matchup here. Now, he hasn't had the production that we really want from him so far this season. He just hasn't gotten the touchdowns, but he does get some attempts from the receiving aspect as well, and if this game does score a lot of points, like I think it will, he will have an opportunity to have a good game. Austin Eckler is another guy I like here. He's actually had some really good games this season, and in the last few weeks, he's really starting to improve. Despite the fact he doesn't rush the ball as much as some of the other guys, he does get more reception attempts, and he has touchdown potential in this particular matchup against Cleveland. Then we're going to look at, let's see here, Alvin Kamara. Now, he is questionable, so you do need to make sure he's playing. He hasn't been particularly great the first 2 weeks, but he is in a pretty cheap price, and he does have upside in this matchup. Then we're going to look at Dameon Pierce. Oh, where'd he go? He's a cheaper option for Houston. He's actually been pretty solid. His price seems a little bit too low for his potential, especially for the last 2 weeks where he's getting touchdowns. He does need a touchdown to really pay off, but I think he's got an opportunity to get one in this particular matchup. And then Jamal Williams for Detroit. Obviously a tough matchup, but he's been one of the better running backs on the season so far this year, so I really do like him here. And then finally, last but not least, Nick Chubb, who's just absolutely been dominant so far this season, having really solid games week to week, and obviously his price is pretty expensive, but he's a pretty safe option. So wide receiver, obviously I talked about Tyreek Hill already, but first off, we're going to look at Cooper Kupp, who's just been pretty solid this season. He has one little bit of off game, but overall his scoring is well enough where he's been good enough in every game to be worthwhile here. He does really gets a ton of targets most of the time. Obviously had one anomaly, but overall he's going to be a top option in this particular slate, and Dallas is a team that he should be able to do well against. Stephon Diggs is another guy I really like. He is very boomer bust though, so do keep that in mind. Sometimes he gets a ton of targets. Sometimes he gets a lot of defense on him. But he should be a guy that should be able to do really well against Pittsburgh this particular week. Then we're going to look at Deebo Samuel for San Francisco. He's been pretty consistent so far this season. Hasn't really had a terrible game, so and his price point obviously is not super ideal, but it's still less expensive than some of the other guys, especially with consistent production. He doesn't get the targets that some of the other guys get, but he's still pretty solid, and I like him in this matchup. A.J. Brown is one of my favorite plays here. His price points, he hasn't had he doesn't always get the targets, but he's getting enough targets, and he's getting close to 100 yards every game. And if he can get a touchdown, then he'll definitely pay off for you in this particular matchup. Then Mr. Kirk for Jacksonville. This is another guy I really like here against Houston. He's been a little bit, he didn't have a great game last week against Philadelphia, but Philadelphia is pretty good sometimes, so against the pass. So I do like him in this matchup, and I think he's a great option for his price especially. Another guy I really like this week, and this is contingent on Tom Brady playing as Mike Evans, with the one of the other wide receivers actually just retiring. That's actually going to boost his targets this week, and if Brady plays, then he's going to be in a good spot here. And he's been pretty good so far this season, and his price is pretty reasonable. Braden Cooks, his price is actually a little bit too cheap for his production, I think. He had a couple bad games in the middle, but he's had some good games, and he's getting 7 to 10 targets a game. And if he can get his touchdown, he'll definitely pay off in this particular matchup. Chris Godwin, he's another guy that I like for Tampa Bay if Brady does play. He is definitely going to get more opportunity this week with the guy retiring, and so I do think he's in a good spot. If Brady plays, he's a top value option at wide receiver. Drake London for Atlanta. He's in a pretty good spot here. He's been pretty solid this season. He had 1 week where he didn't do so good this last week, but overall his price point makes him cheap enough that if he can have a 5 to 7 reception game, 50 to 75 yards, and potentially a touchdown, then you're going to be okay with that. Then Chris Olave for New Orleans. Now he's in a little bit of a tough matchup here, but I think he's been pretty consistent so far this season. He hasn't killed your lineups if you utilize him, and his price point's cheap enough that he can save you some money for other options. And then Lockett for Seattle. He's been pretty good so far this season. His first week was rough, but ever since then he's had at least 7 or 8 targets, and so I do like him in this matchup, and he's pretty inexpensive. And then DJ Moore for Carolina is in a good spot. Not the favorite spot, and he's a little bit boomer bust, but if he can score a touchdown, he'll definitely potentially pay off. At tight end, we have some nice value options, which is going to help you. Tight end and defense are really going to help you drop your average remaining with players value here, and we definitely have some good options to do that. The top tier option, I think, for tight end is Tyler Higbee. He's been pretty consistent this season. He should be able to get you 12 to 15 fantasy points this week, and if he can score a touchdown, that'll definitely up his value. Then Pat Freiermuth for Pittsburgh against Buffalo. Obviously, Pittsburgh, he's going to have to do well in this game for Pittsburgh to stand a chance to keep up with Buffalo in this one, but he should get a lot of opportunities, quite frankly, and his targets should be up this week, so I do like him here. And then Dallas Goedert for Philadelphia, another guy I really like. He should get lots of opportunity here. He's got 10 or 15 point upside, and I think he's been pretty consistent so far this season. He doesn't get as many targets as some of the other guys, but he's in a solid spot. I don't really feel like paying up for George Kittle or now the only other guy that you could pay up for is Hawkinson. He's just been extremely good so far this last week, but he hasn't been that great previously. But he doesn't kill you either necessarily. I mean, he doesn't 5 or 6 fantasy points isn't ideal, but he's cheap enough that he could still be an option if you really want to utilize him. But I don't really think he's the best option on this particular slate. The 49ers defense is my favorite defense against Carolina. They're also pretty cheap at $3,800, and they've been pretty solid so far this season. The Buffalo Bills, the second favorite defense here. They are a little bit more expensive than the 49ers, but they've also been a little bit slightly better, averaging 12 fantasy points a game. But I like both those teams quite a bit. The Vikings are in a great spot against Chicago, and even though they've been kind of up and down this season, I think they're in a good spot. And then finally, the Jaguars against Houston, they're the cheapest option that I think is in a good spot, and they've been very good lately. So overall, I think we have a pretty solid group of guys that we can utilize and mix and match players in order to get fit your lineup. The value isn't as good this week as I would normally like, but overall, it's still a pretty solid slate, and I think you can utilize your tight end position and your defense to help you pay out for some other options. And there's plenty of value at wide receiver. For your flex spot, I would probably put a wide receiver in this week. I just didn't find enough value at running back, and it seemed a little bit more limited than I'd like. But overall, I think it's a pretty solid slate. So thank you guys for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. And have a nice day, guys.